In the mountains just outside of LA, there's a massive concrete arch that rises boldly over a gorge, but it leads to absolutely nowhere. No road connects to it, no traffic ever crosses it, and the only way to reach this location is on foot. Known as California's Bridge to Nowhere, this isolated span was once meant to be the crown jewel of a highway that would cut straight through the San Gabriel Mountains. Built in the depths of the Great Depression, it embodied the optimism of an era when federal projects promised both jobs and progress. But nature had other plans, and what was supposed to be a triumph of modern engineering became an abandoned modern relic. So why does California have a bridge that leads directly into a mountain? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the unusual story of California's Bridge to Nowhere. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's go back to the early 20th century, when LA was bursting at the seams. Around this time, oil strikes, Hollywood, and a flood of new residents had turned the landscape into one of America's fastest growing cities, but expansion hit a natural wall, rather literally, at the San Gabriel Mountains. You see, these peaks loomed just beyond the city, close enough to dominate the horizon, and steep and unpredictable enough to wall Los Angeles off from the valleys behind them. And yet for years, people attempted to tame them. Miners chased gold through their canyons, loggers stripped their timber, small resorts also promised fresh air to city dwellers. However, access was always extremely challenging, as roads washed out in storms, and even if they didn't, the mountain passes remained very dangerous. This entire state of affairs left communities beyond the range feeling rather disconnected. Hence, city leaders began pushing for something bigger, a direct road through the East Fork of the San Gabriel River. If built, it would have connected Azusa in the San Gabriel Valley to Wrightwood on the other side. This would have been a powerful shortcut that could have opened up trade, tourism, and real estate opportunities. So with that in mind, when the Great Depression hit, the project gained an entirely new justification. A highway across the San Gabriels would not only link communities, but also provide jobs through the Federal Works Progress Administration. For many, this seemed like a perfect solution, a road that promised both economic recovery and a permanent improvement of California's growing infrastructure. Construction began in 1936 under the Works Progress Administration at a time when unemployment was still devastating families across California. This project provided a steady source of much-needed employment, and so they found many day laborers, and it didn't take long before crews began blasting into canyon walls. They also carved roadbeds and poured tons of concrete into forms that clung precariously to the cliffs. Day by day, a highway began to take shape where only rugged wilderness had existed before. And the centerpiece was the East Fork Bridge, a 120-foot concrete arch designed to carry cars high above the river below. Though to build it, crews had to tame the river itself, diverting water with makeshift dams and timber scaffolding. From there, wooden falsework, or an intricate skeleton of beams and braces, was erected across the gorge, creating a temporary stage on which the bridge would take shape. Workers balanced on planks dozens of feet above the canyon floor, hauling rebar into place and wiring together the steel skeleton that would give this arch its strength. Then came the concrete. Mixed on site and poured bucket by bucket, it slowly filled the molds, layer after layer, until the arch locked itself into position. This bridge seemed to just grow into the canyon walls, inching closer to its final curve. When it was finished, its smooth white span seemed to gleam against the jagged backdrop of rocks and pine. And believe it or not, for a brief moment, this bridge stood as proof that even in the depths of the Depression, human engineering could outmatch the wild, or at least it was showcased as such in the media. Local newspapers praised it as a triumph, and to many locals, this wasn't just another bridge. It was the promise of a future where the San Gabriel Mountains would no longer stand as a wall between valleys. However, as I mentioned in the introduction, nature had other plans. In March of 1938, Southern California was struck by one of the worst floods in history. Relentless storms pounded the region for days. dropping record rainfall. Rivers swelled into torrents, ripping through towns and farmland. Across LA County, bridges collapsed. Homes were swept away, and more than 100 lives were lost. And with that, the brand new East Fork Road was completely devastated. Entire stretches disappeared under rock slides and mud. Freshly carved canyon walls buckled and fell back into the river. Not to mention that several bridges downstream were also obliterated. And here's the curious thing. When the skies finally cleared, the East Fork Bridge was still standing. But now it was standing in the middle of nowhere. The road leading to it had been erased as though it never existed, and rebuilding was quickly deemed impossible by basically everyone. The Works Progress Administration, which had funded everything from post offices to highways across the country, was already stretched to the limit, not to mention California, which was still facing the consequences of the Great Depression, also had little left to contribute from its own budget. Engineers surveyed the canyon and warned that the East Fork was just too volatile and that this kind of situation would definitely happen again if they did rebuild. In fact, many foresaw a situation like this, but their foresight was too little, too late. See, at this point, the Army Corps of Engineers had just begun building massive flood control projects across LA, including concrete river channels and new dams. Their conclusion was blunt. This was an area that just couldn't be helped. Rebuilding a highway through such unstable terrain would be just throwing good money after bad. Though to be fair, we should point out that local officials were also considering some scaled-down options to cross the mountains. For example, some engineers proposed rerouting the entire highway onto higher ground above the floodplain, essentially building new switchbacks along the canyon walls. Others suggested leaving the bridge in place and still using it, but abandoning the most problematic stretches of road. The idea was that they could replace those sections with a narrow trail that would later be upgraded in the future when budgets became available. And yet beyond that, there were also discussions about constructing a series of smaller wood trestles instead of rebuilding the washed-out concrete span, just to keep the project somehow limping forward. However, every option encountered the same issue: cost. Even the cheapest proposals were estimated in the millions, which, I remind you, was an astronomical figure in the late 1930s. At the same time, other routes were already in motion. The Angel's Crest Highway began in 1929, promised as an alternative north-south corridor to bypass the treacherous East Fork entirely. This all meant that with federal dollars and manpower desperately needed elsewhere, the East Fork project quietly slipped to the bottom of the priority list. So it was. Just 2 years after construction had begun, the dream collapsed, and now California had a bridge to nowhere. When the East Fork Highway was abandoned, officially, the canyon slowly reclaimed the area. Floods carried debris, trails grew over, and the wilderness wrapped itself around the bridge. And from that point on, the structure took a beating. One of the earliest notable events came in 1955, when severe flooding once again cut off the surrounding trails, reinforcing the idea that the East Fork would never be stable enough for a highway. Then, in 1969, a series of massive winter storms further damaged Route 39 up the mountain, sealing the fate of the incomplete road and leaving the bridge permanently isolated. And this was around the time that the public became curious about the bizarre and aging structure. In the 1970s, outdoor magazines began publishing features about the so-called Bridge to Nowhere, and in doing so, they brought wider attention to what had previously only been a local curiosity. The notoriety proved to be beneficial, as in 1989, after years of lobbying by preservationists and local historians, the site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The nomination process highlighted its Depression-era origins under WPA and its remarkable survival as a rare, isolated concrete arch from the 1930s. Newspaper accounts noted a small ceremony at the trailhead where officials unveiled the designation, calling the bridge both a relic of misplaced ambition and a monument to endurance. The listing also meant federal recognition and basic protection, ensuring that even without a road, the bridge would be remembered as a part of America's historic landscape forever. Though, in more recent times, the monument has proven to be somewhat unique. In 1995, a private outfitter launched a legal bungee jump operation from its span, transforming the bridge into a commercial adventure site. So, what if you'd like to see the bridge with your own eyes? Well, today, it's still accessible on foot, where hikers have to cross the San Gabriel River, scramble over some rocks, and eventually come face to face with a concrete arch that seems impossible in such isolation. The trek is demanding and sometimes dangerous, yet the bridge has become one of the most popular hikes in Los Angeles County. And we should also mention that not every story at the bridge has been a positive one. Unfortunately, some visitors have paid the highest price for missteps. They've also played victim to things like flash floods or heat stroke. Hence, authorities constantly remind visitors that despite the bungee jumping, this is no amusement park. Finally, I'd like to conclude with the notion that what makes the Bridge to Nowhere so compelling isn't that it failed, but that it still stands. We'll leave it there for today, but I thank you all for watching. Until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.